Speaking of people who have said they would like to play for the 49ers, Julio Jones on their list. We've learned a lot. Seems like the Falcons wanted a 1. They'll settle for a 2. The Niners have a 2. And every team has a need for a guy like Julio Jones, I guess. Also, the cap is going up significantly the next 2 years. The Niners could potentially afford him in a lot of different ways, but is it the right move? Maverick, why don't you go first?
I would definitely trade, as long as they're not asking for a 1, I would seriously consider it. If it's a third-round pick, if that's what it's taking, plus a player, that I would definitely do that. Conditional 2, kind of similar to what the Colts did with Carson Wentz, where it's a conditional 1, conditional 2, depending on how many games he plays. Julio's market is kind of limited due to the fact that he has a high salary cap, and he hasn't really been willing to restructure his contract in years past. I don't know if he'd be willing to restructure if he was traded to a new team. That's up in the air. But if it's just teams that are able to afford him, there are a couple teams that would be competing with the 49ers. But out of them, I think the 49ers probably have one of the best title windows out of those teams. Maybe the Chargers, if you're betting on Justin Herbert taking an even further leap the next year. But if it's a 2 for Julio, that would take this offense to a whole nother level. I know there's concerns because there's not a true slot guy out of the 3 top receivers, but you get a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL when healthy. You get one of the best projectable wide receivers in Brandon Ayuk, and then you get one of the best Swiss Army knives in Deebo Samuel. That makes a dynamic offense that if they play all 16 games, which that's a major if, that's a dynamic offense.
Yeah, and it's 17 games now, so there's even that one extra game, right? So I think this is a no-brainer. I think people just assume Julio Jones is going to be a huge cap hit, but Jack and I have been kind of on Twitter telling people like, yo, this isn't a ridiculous contract for the amount of player that you're getting in Julio Jones. And as far as like I think it's like, Jack, is like 15 million next year, and then the next 2 seasons are like 11 million, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes. So it's not that like out of the ballpark for the 49ers. I mean, and I think what you're getting, and when people say, we don't have a true slot, look, I think talent will find a way to play on the field, and Kyle Shanahan will be able to utilize the talent. Julio Jones' best season was with Kyle Shanahan as the offensive coordinator. I think if you could get somebody like that, I go back to in 2019 when the 49ers were able to get Emmanuel Sanders and how much that offense took off with a reliable option like Emmanuel Sanders, to bring in Julio Jones, who is a much better player than Emmanuel Sanders, even though, Sanders is a great player. I just think that with the other weapons that we have, and now with the talent like Trey Lance, who we know could sling the ball, having that there for 3 years under contract, that isn't ridiculous money, I think is a no-brainer. You got to bring him in, and, now we're putting pressure on the secondary of other teams, with the Brandon Ayuk and Julio Jones as the 1 and 2, and then Deebo kind of going in there and playing the Swiss Army knife like Matt put. I think it's an unstoppable combination that the 49ers must get.
Yeah, originally I wasn't for Julio Jones, but then kind of looking through and looking at the contract and seeing some information come out this week where those numbers really aren't that bad. $15 million for a guy of Julio Jones caliber, in 2021. And then $11 million the next 2. That's a pretty good number. And I'd be willing, the 49ers were willing to give up a 3rd and a 4th to bring in Emmanuel Sanders. And Julio Jones is miles ahead of Emmanuel Sanders and what he can bring. So if you give up a 2nd-round pick in 2022, and even your comp pick from that you have in 2023 and your 3rd-round comp pick, those are 2 picks that, those players those 2 guys that you're going to select there aren't going to give you the same type of play that you're going to get out of Julio Jones. So I think it's a good move. And then kind of to Mav hit on a lot of the points that I had in my article today, but, he had also mentioned about that McKinnon role and how the running backs would handle that. I actually think the guy that would be perfect in that McKinnon role is Deebo Samuel. That guy, that's how he's built, and we've seen him lined up in the backfield at times. So I would love to see them use him as their 3rd receiver, slot guy, throw him out there in the regular offense in the 21 personnel every once in a while. I just think between those 3 guys that they have.
Back. Yeah.
Yeah.
They have 21 personnel with Deebo at running back and Julio and Ayuk at wide receiver sometimes. Sorry.
Correct. And
I got excited.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, no, and it's very similar to like what they do with Kahushek, right? They'll be in 21 personnel, but it's really like 22 or whatever, and they line them up at all over the place. And they could do the same thing with Deebo Samuel. I just think it would bring so much explosiveness back to the offense. It's really a no-brainer if they can make it happen.
That term just keeps getting used, and it's spot on, is no-brainer. I'm with you guys on that. I think that so I just did a breakdown of this on the Camper Report. Shout out to Ben Camperman. Out to me to have me on his show. And so to me, it's all about, what's the trade compensation got to be and can we fit him on the roster? And the answer is it's reasonable in both respects. When you look at trade compensation, yes, they say that they want a first-round pick, but the reality is that they're probably going to accept a package that involves a second and something else. So I think that is very reasonable. I agree that packaging the 2022 second-round pick with either a third or a fourth from the 2023 draft is a very reasonable amount to pay for someone of Julio's caliber. I would go for it, no problem. Fitting him on the roster, it's been mentioned. Right now, it's $15.3 million as his salary for 2021, comes down to 11.5. As of today, we're currently at about $9.5 million in cap space. We get another $1 million when Rich Berg retires after June 1st. So we're at about $10.5 million. There are 4 contracts that you can mess with to get that $5 million pretty easy. Some of them you probably don't want to, like Jimmy G at 26.4, Eric Armstead at 12.5 this year. But Jimmy Ward at 10.94 with 1 year remaining on his deal. If you take this year's salary, convert it to a signing bonus, and then prorate that over the 2 years remaining this year and next, you've now gotten that $5 million that you need. And you've only secured Jimmy Ward for 1 additional year, which I believe the guaranteed money for 1 additional year is warranted. He has stayed healthy the last 2 years. I think that
was very clever.
To reward him with that would be warranted. And then you're pretty much set. You gain an extra $900K when Sanu or whoever that 6th receiver is drops off the roster, off of those top contracts. I think it's very affordable, and I think it changes the entire dynamic of the team.
And you want Trey Lance to work out. You want him to have a successful transition to the NFL. Give him Julio Jones. I mean, that'll help. And also, from what I've seen from him, I'm not saying he's inaccurate, but when he does miss, he tends to miss a little high. There are reasons. He seems to overstride a little bit. It's correctable. But hey, if that's his tendency, it feels like a golfer who's slicing. When he misses, it's high. Give him freaking Julio Jones, 6'4", can go up and get it. I mean, great. I think it would really be he's the perfect wide receiver for every quarterback, but for Trey Lance in particular, it would really be helpful. My only thing is, he'll cost a second and a third. I think a lot of teams are going to offer that on June 1st. And I don't think the Niners are going to get him unless they significantly outbid some AFC teams for obvious reasons. And I don't know if they will. Like, if they had a first, they could, but they don't. So I ultimately don't think they're going to get him. Like, I more expect like a team like Tennessee to get him, but I think they should, and I think they'll make the best offer they can.
I think Julio Jones plays a role in this too. I think he's one of those players that has enough clout, has been the best player for the Falcons, and if he goes to management and says, "Look, trade me to the Niners," like that's where I want to go. I think they acknowledge that and they do that. And
he hasn't done that yet, though. He hasn't
yet. He hasn't yet, but I think that that there's a list and then there's who's actually going to offer things for them. And if the 49ers are one of those teams that are at least in the top 3 or whatever as far as offers, I think Julio Jones could help push it over the edge by saying, I want to go here. And I think Atlanta seems like they're doing right by Julio to even, be willing to trade him, knowing that he still has a lot left in the tank.